And good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our business consortium. It is great to see you all again. My name is Mark Jeffries. Out of interest, how many people in the room were here last year at the same time for this amazing event? Let me just see some hands. So lovely to see all of you again. For everyone who's new, my name is Mark. This is what I do for a living. I host conferences all over the world, and I'm going to be your guide throughout today as well. We have, as you know, our first speaker, David Whyte, who is a quite remarkable mind, a poet with the most incredible insights into organizational leaderships. But as poets go, sometimes they pitch up a bit late, and one of those days happens to be today. So, as a result, because we're looking at just about 7 or 8 minutes, I'm going to share with you an idea that I share with many audiences when I start these conferences, just to fill a little bit of time, and then I know our poet will be here for the microphone, and then he will be on this stage doing what we've all come for. So here's the idea I'm going to share with you today. Think about the job that you currently have. Think about what it says on your business card or on your contract of employment. Think about what you do. I'm going to propose to you now that actually you have 3 additional jobs that you may or may not even realize, and I'm going to take you through them. Job number 1, and you probably won't like this at all, but it's true. Job number 1, in addition to the job you have, you are head of sales for yourself. Of course you are. From the minute you walk out of your front door in the morning to the minute you get home in the evening, people look at you. They observe how you walk. They listen to how you talk. They watch how you sit down. They look at every signal that comes streaming off you every day, and they make a decision. Do I buy this person or not? And as a result, whether we like it or not, we are constantly selling ourselves, because we could have the finest idea, the best innovation, the best new approach, but if we are not getting that message out in a specific way that is easily heard by the people around us, we are not selling ourselves very well. Years ago, I interviewed Tony Hsieh. He was the CEO and founder of Zappos, no longer with us, unfortunately. And I asked him, well, what's your hardest challenge? And he said, well, at Zappos, the biggest challenge is recruitment. So what do you mean? He goes, well, everybody wants to work for Zappos. We're inundated with resumes, and it's very hard for our HR people to find the right talent, the right culture to bring into the organization. So we did this for a while, and it was very successful. He said we would invite groups of people for group interviews to our campus in Las Vegas. The agreement was this: we would fly them in, we would put them up in a hotel in Vegas. All they had to do was be at McCarran International Airport, as it was called, on time for the Zappos bus. The Zappos bus driver would arrive, big sign. They'd all get on the bus, they'd come to campus. They would arrive at the entrance, and the bus driver would say, welcome to Zappos, everyone. Go through the main entrance into the convention space, and the head of HR will be in to greet all of you. They would all go into the convention space, and the head of HR would finally walk in. Who was the head of HR? Anyone? The bus driver, exactly. Why? Because the interview started on the bus. Why? Because we are head of sales for ourselves, and the selling never ends. They were looking for the right culture when people felt they were off the record. Job number 2, you are director of translation. What do I mean by this? Well, think of the worlds in which you live. So much complexity, so much knowledge. You are the masters of it. You live and breathe this world. You understand all of the jargon, all of those initialisms. You know what's going on. Now, here's the problem. As you go through life, you start to suffer from what's known as the curse of knowledge. This is where you assume that everyone around you has the same level of knowledge that you do, but they do not. That's the curse of knowledge. And so as you start dropping those acronyms and those initialisms, you start losing people on this communication journey that you are on. So your job number 2, director of translation, translate as you go. I'll give you a ridiculously simple example. Most of my work as a host and an MC and a speaker happens to be here in the United States, where I now live, but a lot of events still happen in the EMEA region, which, as you know, is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, right? All I'm doing, for the very few people in this room that might not know what EMEA stands for, probably 0, I'm just translating as I go. Why? Because I want to take everyone with me on the communication journey. Why? Because if people remember what you've said, it resonates. If you've lost them, it's gone. So that's job number 2. That means we're left with just one more job. Job number 3, you are chief storyteller. Why? Because we're humans. And humans love stories. We thrive from stories. David's going to tell you the most remarkable stories. And why are stories so important? Because they live with you forever. I could show you 1,000 stats on the screen right now. I could show you a bunch of charts and numbers. You'll forget most of them. We all do. We're humans. But I'll tell you a story, like the Zappos story and the bus driver. You will never forget it. And so stories are everything. Stories are our lifeblood. So my message, especially to the tech community in front of whom I stand a lot, is find the stories in the data. Find the personal, emotional moments that create a story and tell those stories. Because your message will resonate much longer and much louder with a story behind it rather than just a stat. Think of it this way. When I put my darling daughter to bed, Skylar, she's 9 years old, she's so cute, I tuck her up all tight. She never says to me, "Daddy, you show me a pie chart." No. She says, "Daddy, tell me a story." So those are your 3 new jobs. Head of sales for yourself, director of translation, and chief storyteller. I'm now going to get off the stage in just a few moments. Our amazing poet will be in my place. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mark. Although whenever you're introduced as the amazing whatever, it's always bound to lead to existential disappointment, I feel so. But I'll do my best under that aegis. Thank you. I want to work with what's invisible in many ways in our everyday lives and what doesn't get spoken to. And in many ways that's been the historic and traditional job of the poet, is to speak to what cannot be said. Yeah. But all of us have that wish inside us, actually, to make what is hidden and unspoken and as yet invisible, visible and real in the world, including ourselves, actually. Quite often when we walk into a room, most of our talents are invisible, most of what we have to give. And often the person that people are seeing when we appear in the room is not the person who has actually got themselves ready that morning and commuted and walked through the door, or alternatively turned on the Zoom screen that morning. And I want to start with a morning poem, actually, a piece, and it's really about being found again in a different way, allowing yourself to be found in a different way. We need our strategic minds in order to grapple with those pie charts, and in order to work with a lot of the logistics of our life. But quite often, if we try to work with logistics only from a logistical point of view, we end up charging around at the periphery and on the surface. Yeah. And the tail is wagging the dog quite often. In many ways, all of our great contemplative traditions that work with mindfulness say you actually have to give up on the peripheral strategic mind that's always naming things too easily and go to a deeper place inside you where you can then use the logistical and strategic mind as a good servant to, you could say, your soul's desires in the world. Yeah. The part of you that wants to belong to the world in the biggest way it can. Yeah. This is a poem I wrote for a good friend of mine who passed away at the height of his powers. His name was John O'Donoghue. He became I knew him when he was a poor priest in the heart of Connemara, and poor as a church mouse, and he later became a multi-million best-selling author with a book that I saw in its early stages and spoke all over the world. He was a brilliant speaker. But he was a priest for 17 years, actually. It was a bit like buying a boat, because he said the best 2 days of his life was when he became a priest and when he left the priesthood. But the Irish aren't known for getting up early in the day. If you go on holiday in the west of Ireland and get up at 6 in the morning, you'll have the place to yourself. You know? And they're just turning over, thinking about whether they should hurl themselves into the hours of the day or not. But the one time when John would get up would be to lead this dawn mass at Easter time. And I would often be at 10 o'clock at night on the west coast of the United States, where I make my home now, thinking about him getting up, and there'd be 1,000 people in the ruins of Corkham Row Abbey, actually, in North Clare. And it would be a remarkable occasion. And sometimes the sun even did come out, too, at the same time. Yeah. So after he passed away, I was thinking about him at 10 o'clock on the evening before Easter, and I wrote this piece for him, and it's about greeting the morning, and the morning finding the most important part of you, actually. One of the great tragedies of waking into the to-do list is that the to-do list was put together by the person you were yesterday. So how do you start from a new place, actually? How could you use this conference, for instance, to feel as if you're just seeing it all as if for the first time again? So this is called Blessing for the Morning Light. The blessing for the morning light, blessing for the morning light. May it find you even in your invisible appearances. May you be seen to have risen from some other place you know and have known in the darkness, and that carries all you need. May you see what is hidden in you as a place of hospitality and shadowed shelter. May what is hidden in you become your gift to give. May you hold that shadow to the light, and the silence of that shelter to the word of the light. May you join every previous disappearance with this new appearance, this new morning, this being seen again, new and newly alive. The blessing of the morning light to you. May it find you even in your invisible appearances. May you be seen to have risen from some other place you know and have known in the darkness, and that carries all you need. May you see what is hidden in you as a place of hospitality. May you see what is hidden in you as a place of hospitality and shadowed shelter. May what is hidden in you become your gift to give. May you hold that shadow to the light, and the silence of that shelter to the word of the light. May you join every previous disappearance with this new appearance, this new morning, this being seen again, new and newly alive, new and newly alive. I often think that poetry is the art of overhearing yourself say things you didn't know about your world or yourself, yeah? And quite often didn't want to know, thank you very much, because you were quite happy in the sheltered world you had until you realized you had something slightly wrong in your mind and in the way you were living. Yeah. And so the line I overheard myself saying, where I suddenly realized I'd known it all along, was, may you join every previous disappearance with this new appearance, this new morning, this being seen again, new and newly alive. Yeah. When you think of it, all of us have been through so many disappearances in our life. Yeah. If you were to meet your 15-year-old self again, you'd have to spend an hour persuading them that you were them 20, 30, 40 years later. Yeah. And they certainly wouldn't like your fashion sense. Yeah. They'd be saying, what happened? We've been through so many disappearances where we were often, against our will, dragged through a very narrow place to get into the next dispensation of our life. Yeah. And human beings are constantly going through these cycles of appearance and then necessary disappearance in order to learn what you need to learn, in order to become someone who's not so full of themselves as they were in the previous cycle of your life. Yeah. Someone who's a little more conversational, a little more invitational, a little more generous in their life. It sometimes takes everything, and many times, in order to get into a new dispensation of our life, you don't breast the tape like an Olympic athlete. You crawl in there on your hands and knees at the beginning of each cycle. So we're used to going through these experiences of undoing in our life, in each succeeding epoch of our existence. But a beautiful question is, what would it be like if I actually, if I actually consciously undid myself? If I consciously worked to simplify myself at crucial thresholds in my existence? If I wasn't just dragged into the next revelation of my life, but I could actually walk in there under my own steam. So I often recite this piece to myself just to wake up and to let myself be found by the world in a different way. I was working with a big consulting company in Denmark last year, and I became really close friends with the founder of the company. And I went off to the middle of Sweden, where they held their summer university. We had the 3 incredible days out in the Swedish countryside. I was speaking in a boathouse overlooking this lake, and just a magic time. And then we drove back, and we had marvelous conversation. And we went to see the stone circle overlooking the Baltic Sea, except this being Sweden, it wasn't a circle. It was in the shape of a Viking ship. And the sun was going down. It was really remarkable. And then we were driving back across the bridge, the famous bridge between Sweden and Denmark, which goes for miles. And this massive storm came in with, black tornadoes and lightning and rainbows. It was absolutely incredible. We were seeing sailing yachts being turned over in the waters beneath the bridge, and it was just as if everything was culminating in some kind of astonishing drama, and I could feel things changing inside myself. And anyway, I got dropped off in front of my hotel, and Copenhagen was completely deserted because everyone was in sheltering from this storm that had come through, this summer storm. And I was looking down this beautiful street, actually, full of art galleries and whatnot, and there were puddles, the side of the road, and the late light was forming colors in the puddles, and I had this sudden question, which I found myself asking almost involuntarily, which was, what if your work's over now, David? What if you've done your work? And what the essentiality of what you needed to say is actually being said. And it's being said by enough other people now that you've done your work. Well, I found myself barely daring to say it, because the ancient intuition is, if you've done your work, then your life is done also, and you're on your way out. That's the ancient mythological and religious experience human beings have had. So I allowed myself to think that, actually, well, what if? What if I have done my work, and what if my life is over? What if you're just allowed to have a bonus time, actually, now for the rest of your existence? And it was a very powerful, very physical experience, and I've kept it to this day, actually. I just went for a walk around the Capitol Dome here, saying, isn't it great, to come back and see the sun in the morning, to hear your daughter's face, to hear your daughter's voice on the phone, to be able to have a cup of coffee in the morning and to taste the coffee. But also to be reduced to the essentiality of your existence at the same time. After I'd had this experience, I've got a Zen master friend, actually, Henry Shukman, very good poet too. I called him up. I said, Henry, tell me about this experience I've just had. And he said, oh, welcome to the cohorts of the walking dead, he said. I said, really? He said, yeah, all my best teachers have had this experience. They died years ago. I said, well, it is remarkable, and it gives you a certain kind of freedom. If people get angry at you and say, you're dead to me, you say, oh, thank you, it's kind of a compliment, But this brings me to the first element in deepening any conversation, which is the necessity, thank you for that drum roll, the necessity of stopping the conversation you're having now. I have 7 elements that I work with around deepening the conversation. We'll just probably, because I've just got a brief hour here, we'll just probably get to work with a few of them. But the first element is to stop the conversation you're having now. Not for puritanical reasons, stopping things for the sake of stopping them, but because we almost always need to drink from a deeper well. We need to go to a place of deeper perspective than our peripheral busyness is bequeathing us at the surface. And to do that, you have to break the bonds with the way you're stuck to the edges of your life at the moment. And to begin with, it actually feels as if you're dying a little bit, actually, because you've been putting your eggs all in that basket. You've been shaping your identity around those peripheral edges. This is a piece I wrote a good few years ago. I recited it last night to a smaller audience, but it was a very powerful piece in letting go of a conversation that was going on in my life. One of the dynamics in the artistic world, but also in leadership too, is when a dynamic of impersonation starts to take over your life. And the impersonation is very, very subtle because you're actually impersonating yourself. You have certain behaviors, certain ways you've been holding your conversation that have got you to this place in your life, and they've been good to you, these ways of being. But suddenly you're thrust into a level of responsibility or a level of articulation or a level of visibility where suddenly all your flaws are visible. And all the ways that you're repeating yourself are visible too. And the most sobering day is when you look yourself in the mirror in the morning and realize you're just impersonating this previous self. But for some reason, it just doesn't feel real. And I realized that I'd got to a place where I was really stuck in a kind of rut. I was repeating stories. I was telling them in the same way. No one was noticing except me, really, and I sat down and I said, "Okay, David, think of a story you've never told in your life. Think of an image that you haven't worked with. What's completely new to you?" And I sat down at my desk and I immediately had this image of myself on my mother's kitchen floor with one knee up and one knee down looking at a book, which was, when I was little, was my favorite place to read, actually, while my mother was in the kitchen working away. It was kind of a classic old-fashioned scene. And one of my favorite times in life was my mother ironing. She had a beautiful Irish voice. She was Irish. And she'd be singing away, ironing, and I'd be sat in a basket of linen. As far as I'm concerned, this is heaven. And I don't expect any woman in my life to repeat this experience for me. But that was it. It's all been downhill from there, yes. And the smell of linen, the smell of ironing. And it's interesting, actually. I still, to this day, I often prepare before I go on stage, not by thinking about exactly what I was doing, but by ironing a shirt, whatever I'm going to be wearing, and then just contemplating the physical experience of what's the essential, what needs to be said, really. And but this time I was on the kitchen floor. My mother was there, and I was looking at this book that an auntie had given me, actually, a sister of my father, and it was a book of Native American stories, full of stories from all over this continent, little knowing that I would make my home here on this continent many years later. So it was full of stories from the northeast and the far west, and probably from this area too, of the native people who lived here. But my very favorite story was the story of a boy being taught how to cross a piece of broken ground in the forest without making a sound. And it was beautifully illustrated. I can still remember the aroma of this book, actually, the pages, the ink, and the smell of the ink that came off the pages. But there was a picture there of an elder standing there with great gravitas. And at his feet was this boy taking off his moccasins. And behind the boy was this tunnel of twigs and leaves that he was going to cross without making a sound. All of us as children came across this image at one time or another of going quietly through the forest like a young native girl or boy without making a whisper. And this story affected me so much when I was a child. I would go out and practice my non-existent Native American skills in the local woods and fields of Yorkshire. I probably sounded like a mastodon, coming through the forest, but as far as I was concerned, I was that boy. And I said, what is it that's speaking to you, David, about that image? And I realized it was the way that things change around us without being announced. No one tells you, for instance, when you're 12 or 13, that you're just about to go through these mind-blowing physiological changes where you won't recognize yourself or the world, you won't recognize the desires you're having, and you won't recognize the mind you suddenly have as an adolescent. You'll be completely unrecognizable to yourself. It just starts to happen. No one tells you when you leave home about all the dynamics of living alone in the world, actually. It just starts to happen. No one tells you about the long-term consequences of love and commitment, that the honeymoon stage is not necessarily representative of the long-term marriage or commitment stage. That there are other doorways to go through. It just starts to happen around you. So this is a piece I wrote that in many ways gave me my freedom into the next stage of my life, and it's called Sometimes. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests. Conceived out of nowhere, but in this place beginning to lead everywhere. Requests to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests, conceived out of nowhere, but in this place beginning to lead everywhere. This phenomena where the first change in the season is just literally like the first leaf falling in the autumn as you're walking along and you realize the season's just about to change. And you can feel that out in the square there with the leaves just beginning to fall now. What would it be like to actually participate in the change of seasons right from the beginning? Instead of hanging on to your old life, until it's the middle of winter and you're still wearing summer clothing. What would it be like to actually pay attention and realize that parts of you are actually no longer alive in the same way? The world's no longer what it was. And yet, at the same time, you're going to return to something to which you've been faithful all your life, which is the way you were made to hold the conversation of existence. Almost always, the late stage of any particular epoch in our life is this stage of impersonation. But it's also because we've lost our footing. We've lost our ground. But to begin with, we're just put into a conversation with the unknown, actually. So the first step is stopping the conversation we're having now in order to drink from a deeper well to get to a deeper ground. The second step in deepening the conversation is almost always cultivating a relationship with the unknown. You have to be comfortable with not knowing for a while. And if you were to come up with an answer at this stage, it would be the wrong answer. If you were to set off in a certain direction, it would be the wrong direction. You've not actually come to ground yet. You've just let go of the way you were holding on to life in a way that was not healthy either for yourself, for your loved ones, or your colleagues at work. Yeah? And then the third step is coming to ground in the unknown, just bumping up against something that's new, but real actually, but which you can't fully articulate to begin with. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories who could cross a shimmering bed of leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests, conceived out of nowhere, but in this place beginning to lead everywhere. Requests to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right. Questions that have no right to go away. So the lines that were startling that I overheard myself writing in those lines were to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. It's, if you think about how many hours you spend doing your work, either in the workplace or doing your work at home, you're probably involved with your work, your level of responsibility, at least 8 hours a day, but often 9, 10, 11, 12 if you're running a place, yeah. If you think about it, you're actually practicing at becoming someone all of those hours of the day. Imagine if you were to practice imagine if you were to practice a musical instrument for 8, 9, 10, 11 hours a day. Can you imagine how good you would get at it? And it wouldn't matter if you had any musical proclivity at all. If you practiced the saxophone 8 or 9 hours a day, you would become very good very quickly. If you practice the violin, if you practice the guitar. Yeah. So a very powerful question to ask yourself, by the way I'm doing my work at the moment and the way I am with other people, who am I practicing at becoming? Do I even want to become that person that I'm practicing at becoming? Because quite often we have this dynamic of contingency going on in our mind where we'll say, well, I'll just be this person during the week and I'll return to my real persona, my real self at the weekends. Yeah? But because we're spending so much time practicing, that's actually the person you're becoming. And it's one of the great mythological motifs, of every film and play and story about human beings, is that they start to practice doing something temporarily and then they become that person they don't want to become through that practice. Yeah. And they have to get back to their original foundation. But quite often they have to get back to their original foundation through trauma, breaking apart, or difficulty. Yeah. But what would it be like to get with the program right away and to understand the changes that are already going on in your life? To stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away. If we're talking about leadership, one of the chief tasks of a leader is to work with the questions that have no right to go away. You can turn your face away from them, but when you turn your face back, they're still there. You can pretend they're not there, but when you stop pretending, those things are still there. And one of the great tasks of leadership is to turn not only your own eyes, but the eyes of your team or your organization towards the questions that have no right to go away. And of course, we have lots of dramatic instances of companies that refused to have certain conversations, and then the conversation had them rather than the other way around. And it's really interesting in your personal life. For instance, I think it's a very powerful thing in a marriage to look, or a relationship, to look towards the questions that have no right to go away. And not only an individual can turn their faces away from a conversation, but a couple can too at the same time. And the interesting thing is, when you turn your face away from a conversation which is real and has to be had, then everything seems to go into neutral, including the relationship and your own personal life at the same time. And the powerful dynamic is that you make things real just by turning your eyes towards the conversation again. You don't have to solve it, you just have to be looking at it together, actually, not knowing how it's going to be solved. But at least things are real again. And I think this is one of the things leaders need to understand about people, actually, is that, as I said last night, people are not looking for Shangri-La in the workplace. And if you created it for them, they'd get deeply uncomfortable and have to go off somewhere else and be employed by a place that wasn't Shangri-La. What they're looking for in many ways is a real conversation. And when things get difficult, they just want to know that whatever the difficulty is, it's actually the one they're grappling with. And that an ersatz, substituted conversation has not been made up, to cover over the real conversation that needs to be had. And I think if people feel like they're having a real conversation, no matter how difficult it is, they will stay in that place. They will stay in the place because they can actually relate to other people can relate to them, and everyone can relate to the actual reality. So the ability to say, this is the difficulty, this is what we're working with, we don't know how it's going to be solved, but we're going to actually all look together and have the conversation. So the underlying understanding that you don't do the work as a leader, you create the conversation, and the conversation does all the work. And this is part of our relationship to the unknown. So if we stop the conversation we're having now, we're immediately put into a relationship with a horizon which is not familiar. And it's really important, I think, to understand that you've never been rewarded in your life for not knowing. How many times in the classroom growing up in your educational career were you rewarded for saying, Miss, Sir, I've absolutely no idea what you're talking about. I remember this in my physics class with the equations across the board from left to right, And there were people in the class who understood exactly what he was talking about from the moment he started the chalk on the blackboard, to the moment he finished at the other end. But I didn't have that kind of mind. And so I just wanted him to stop, right at the left-hand side of the board, And because I was actually really interested in knowing. And how many children were really interested in knowing and had it squelched out of them, either by peer pressure of needing to know or by the teacher not teaching properly? Because you have to have a genius teacher who says, you don't know? That's wonderful. I'm going to show you. So quite often, we won't allow ourselves not to know. It's really interesting just to take a walk around, the Capitol Dome here and watch the way your mind is constantly trying to have an answer to everything. It wants an easy answer, and it wants an easy name that it can put on things and on other people. And it's the great disease of our political conversation at the moment, is the naming of other people in ways that diminish them so that the other side can feel as if they have them power over whatever they feel is overwhelming their life. The ability to allow things to have their own name. But in your personal life, for instance, if you're a parent, to stop putting names on your children about who they are and where they should go. And to actually stop and hear the voice of your son or your daughter for the first time, as if you've just discovered it. And it's one of the difficulties, of course, of adolescence, because the curve of transformation is so steep in adolescence. You're almost always, as a mother or father, trying to relate to someone who is actually not there anymore. Especially if you've gone through that transition of being the hero to the zero, which happens on the threshold of adolescence. And they live with you, the children live with you as spies and saboteurs for years, watching your every psychological move, until one day in the kitchen when they're 13 or 14, usually when you've got your back turned to them, usually when you are making something for them, the psychological stiletto goes in, to mum or dad's kidney area. And you go, oh my God, you turn around and you say, how did you know exactly where to place that? And they say, I've been watching you for a few years. And of course, they know all of our flaws. They know all of our weaknesses, all the places where we're putting on a show, all the places where we're not real. To be able to stop the conversation of being the parent, who knows everything, turn and to actually find out who's there and why they're actually stimulating you in that way to get a certain kind of reaction. I always remember there was one time I was in this robust conversation with my daughter, the kind of robust conversation, my adolescent daughter, that culminates in the daughter running up the stairs really heavily, banging every step as they go. And my standing on the stairs with my hand raised, about to say the last unhelpful thing, on top of all the other unhelpful things I'd been saying, with great satisfaction, because you've earned the ability to say the unhelpful thing. And I was standing there with my mouth open and my hand up, when her bedroom door slammed and the whole house shook, And I stood there with my hand up and I said, wait a minute, David. I said, take your own advice that you spread so liberally around the planet, This is not a real conversation. How do you make the conversation more real? First of all, stop the one. No, don't improve it. Don't ameliorate it. Don't re-strategize. Don't just stop it. So I took my hand down, closed my mouth, and went down into the kitchen. And then said, what's the next step? Make a friend of the unknown, Don't know what you're going to say. So I just instinctively started to make tea, I grew up in Britain and Ireland, so it takes you, to make a proper cup of tea, takes you 15 or 20 minutes. Ever since you threw all that tea in Boston Harbor, you've never wanted to make a proper cup of tea. I gave up years ago trying to get decent tea in this country, but it's kind of a psychological allergy you have from the revolution, We are not going to make that stuff, and if we do, it's going to be horrible, But So anyway, I got my mother's tea set down that we have, and her grandmother's tea set, and I set it down. I got the chocolate McVitie's biscuits, the whole thing, and I took it into the living room, and I said, don't rehearse what you're going to say. Don't say. And I went up the stairs and I knocked on the door, and in a different, more invitational voice, I said, come on, Charlotte. I'm sorry for my part of whatever it is. Let's just have a cup of tea together. So she came down, out the door in that wonderful adolescent body language of the elbows firmly gripped together and the head down. And she sat down opposite me, and the tray's there with the McVitie's biscuits and the tea. And I saw one eye was on the chocolate biscuits. I said, I've got a chance here, And we were there for the longest time before, eventually, out of nowhere, I suddenly found myself saying, I said, Charlotte, tell me one thing you want me to stop doing as a father. And tell me one thing you want me to do more of as a father. I was amazed. She looked up at me, and she knew immediately. She had 100 things she wanted me to stop doing, actually. So the one thing was no problem, but the interesting thing was she didn't really know what she wanted me to do more of. And that's where we had the beginnings of a renewed conversation as a father and a mother. You know, one of the powerful things about being a human being is that we make promises. We're promise-making animals, really. And all of our religious inheritance is full of how you make promises and keep to them. But it's really interesting to think that you have to actually dismantle promises at times, when they're out of their season. And this is very true in when you're running a company or a team also. You find you made promises when you had an earlier understanding of the dynamic. But now you can't actually keep to those promises. You did your best at the time, but you didn't understand it. You have to actually break the promise. And there's a vulnerability to doing that. You can hide and break the promise, and that's not a real conversation that has any integrity. Or you can be there and admit that you have to break the promise, that you didn't understand the full dynamic and you're really sorry for it, but that has to happen. I'm thinking, for instance, when there's a newborn in your life, whether it's yours, as a father or a mother, or if you're an auntie or an uncle or a godfather or a godmother, the promises you make over that cradle are always ones of absolute protection. So you make a conscious or unconscious promise over that cradle. You say, nothing's going to happen to you on my watch. That's my job in life, is to protect you. And it's a real promise, and it's in the right seasonality of an infant's vulnerability. But if you think about it, if you kept to that promise when they were 14 or 15 years old, you would smother their life. And yet quite often we carry on through each epoch of our life with the momentum of outworn promises. So this is a piece I wrote coming out of an experience I had in one of my favorite architectural buildings in the world. And it's a little ruined fishing chapel on the edge of Connemara in a little village called Cong. It's right on the Mayo-Galway border. There's a village, if you go to Ireland on holiday, you have to go to Cong, actually. C-O-N-G is the name of it. And there's gorgeous fishing there. It's between two lakes, Loch Mask and Loch Corrib, and there's water running everywhere, actually, and there are salmon leaping and trout leaping and geese and ducks and waterfowl and herons. And then there's this ruined monastery dedicated to St. Fen. And it's probably 800 to 1,000 years old, the buildings, And these ruined monasteries are all over Britain and Ireland, actually, after the dissolution of the monasteries in the 1500s. And the remarkable thing about them is they're almost always probably more beautiful than they ever were in their heyday, which I think is quite a comfort when you reach middle age and you're looking in the mirror and you think you might actually look better as a beautiful ruin than you ever did when you were at your best in your 20s. But the most beautiful ruin there is this stone cottage that's on stilts over the water. And in the floor of the stone cottage is a slit down which the monks would drop a net. And next to that opening, that letterbox opening in the floor, is a fireplace, actually, where they would have sat, keeping warm, waiting for a salmon or a trout to run into the net. And apparently there was a bell attached to the net. When the bell rang, you probably almost had a salmon, knowing any of you are fishermen or fisherwomen there. And then there was a roof over it and a chimney. And the wonderful thing about the ruin, what makes it more beautiful today, is that the wall that faces downstream has fallen away. But you've still got the three walls cradling you around you. You've got this stone floor, you got the chimney, you got the fireplace. And I was in there one January day, and I was looking downstream, and I was just quietening my mind, and I was realizing that I was looking at everything that was flowing away. So I just asked myself the question, what's already flown away, David, flowed away or flown away from your life that you haven't admitted yet? And I realized, I had this sudden realization of a relationship I had that was based on an outworn promise, actually. And the interesting thing was, I had never uttered this promise out loud. I'd never said it out loud, but the bond was so tight that I might as well have shouted it from the rooftops, actually. I said, isn't that interesting? I said, how many other promises have I made in my life that I've not admitted to? Yeah. And I said to myself, this is a promise that needs to be given away, because actually it's holding the other person in an imprisonment in the same way it's holding me. And I've never realized it until now. So I said to myself, I asked myself the beautiful question, how do you break a promise in a way that's actually good for both sides? And I thought to myself, there's almost nothing in the literature about breaking promises. There's lots of stuff about making promises and holding on to them, for dear life. But how do you constructively give away what's no longer real, just as you would let go of the promise you made over a young child in order to allow them to become themselves as they grow older? So I wrote this piece. It's called To Break a Promise. And it's about letting go of a conversation that being held from both sides, actually, and needs to be let go of. Yeah. To break a promise, make a place of prayer. To break a promise, make a place of prayer. No fuss now, no fuss now. Just lean into the white brightness and say what you needed to say all along. Nothing too much. Words as simple and as yours and as heard as the bird song above your head or the water running gently beside you. Let your words join one to another, the way stone nestles on stone, the way water just leaves and goes to the sea, the way your promise breathes and belongs with every other promise the world has ever made. To break a promise, make a place of prayer. We don't do this lightly. To break a promise, make a place of prayer. No fuss now. Just lean into the white brightness and say what you needed to say all along. Nothing too much. Words as simple and as yours and as heard as the bird song above your head or the water running gently beside you. Let your words join one to another, the way stone nestles on stone, the way water just leaves and goes to the sea, the way your promise breathes and belongs with every other promise the world has ever made. Now let them go on. Let your words have their own life without you. Let the promise go with the river. Stand up, walk away, have faith. There was something just very foundational and practical about those last words, to have faith. Because I realized as I did walk away, if the promise is still real, it will come back to you, actually. You won't be able to give it away. Or it will come back to you in a different way in which you can hold it, that's real for your life and for the life of the other person. Or most likely, if you spent an hour in a freezing cold fishing cottage on a January day, you probably do need to give the promise away, and it won't come back. But either way, just letting it go to see how it comes back to you. Letting the conversation go, letting go of your grip on things, so that you can hold it in a different way. So these are I work with 7 elements for deepening the conversation. We only had an hour. I wanted to work in a real way with what I think are the first real steps. the necessity to drink from a deeper well, and therefore the necessity for stopping the surface conversation you're having now. Yeah. If you could choose a conversation in your personal life you need to stop having. Yeah. And actually, you can just ask your loved ones around you, and they will tell you in a minute. You just say, what's the conversation I need to stop having? And they just tell you. You say, wait a minute, just walk around the block, think about it for a moment, you know. And they know. But you could do the same thing with your people in your team. What's the conversation I need to stop having as a leader? They just come out with it right away. And you move to the next person, they come out with it right away, and it's the same thing. And you say, oh my God, why haven't you been telling me, you know? So what's the conversation I need to stop having? And then, what's the state of my friendship with the unknown? Do I have any friendship with the unknown at all? Or do I constantly try to dismiss it by putting easily made names on things? Yeah? Do I allow myself to come to ground in the third element, which is coming to ground, bumping up against something I don't fully recognize? And allowing myself to come to ground in this new truth that I just haven't been willing to face until now. Just finish with the last piece. I realize I'm going a few minutes over, but I'll just call on the patience of the organizers here. Yeah. And so this is a piece, it's one of the few pieces that I've ever written under commission. And I worked with all of the top Boeing managers for a year and a month, actually, and there's 600 of them. Any company that has 600 top managers is already in deep trouble. But it was at a very dramatic time in the organization's life, actually, and they just launched the 777. And the 777 had been put together in a collaborative way that they'd never managed until that moment. It was all led by a genius called Phil Condit. And Phil Condit brought me in and a group of other people to work with what I would call now conversational leadership. They didn't call it then. But anyway, we had a dramatic year anyway. And at the end of it, though, the 777 was just being launched. And I got a phone call saying, we'd love you to write it's won an aerospace trophy, the Collier Trophy, and we'd love there to be a poem at the dinner beside everyone's place setting, dedicated to the 777. And I said, poets don't do very well under these circumstances, I said, I'm not going to write a piece of propaganda for the 777, I said, but I'll have a go. But you have to be prepared to have a blank page or nothing at all, because it has to be good, yeah. So I put the phone down and I said, I've spent half my life on airplanes. What's happening up there? And the amazing thing is, when you're at 30,000 feet and looking out, there's no visible means of support, yeah. And I've often thought it's why, even though there are quite often gorgeous biblical scenes outside of the window, of tumulus clouds and colors and rivers and mountains, people have the shutters down and they're watching Dumb and Dumber on the back of the... And it's just as if people are saying, I am not at 30,000 feet, with no visible means of support. But every now and again, when you're dropping down through levels of humidity and temperature and pressure, you will suddenly see this solid white line around the wing, yeah, forming that Bernoulli curve, as it's called, yeah. And you realize that the powers that are holding you in place are as solid as concrete. But they're actually made of a conversation between velocity and the shape of the wing. And that shape has been there in the human imagination for 30,000 years. The Aborigines in Australia discovered the shape of that in their boomerangs. Yeah? But we never brought those two elements together until just over 100 years ago. and now we can travel enormous distances. So this is the piece I wrote, and so it's called Working Together, which is the slogan they used to actually construct the 777. Working together. We shape ourselves to fit this life, and by the world are shaped again. We shape ourselves to fit this life, and by the world are shaped again. The visible and the invisible working together in common cause to produce the miraculous. We shape ourselves to fit this world, and by the world are shaped again. The visible and the invisible working together in common cause to produce the miraculous. I'm thinking of the way the invisible air, passed at speed round a shaped wing, easily holds our weight. So may we in this life trust to those elements we have yet to see or imagine, and find the true shape of our own self by forming it well to the great intangibles about us. We shape ourselves to fit this world, and by the world are shaped again. The visible and the invisible working together in common cause to produce the miraculous. I'm thinking of the way the invisible air, traveled at speed round a shaped wing, easily holds our weight. So may we in this life trust to those elements we have yet to see or imagine, and find the true shape of our own self by forming it well to the great intangibles about us. So I wish you all well in shaping your essential conversational self to the great intangibles about you. And thank you very much for the invitation to be here.
David, thank you so much. Very thought-provoking start to a day of learning. Outstanding. Once again, David Whyte, thank you very much. Now, a couple of notes I'm going to share with you just before you leave the room. We are, first of all, we're very, very keen for you all to download the mobile app. So there is a slide for the mobile app, and here it comes. There we go. Make sure you download that. There's QR codes there. There are throughout the actual property as well. This is a living, breathing thing. So when we're updating information, if times change, consult the app, and that's your go-to. And there's prizes as well, by the way. 12:15 today, please be sure to return to this room for the lunch keynote by UW Chancellor Jennifer Mnookin. That's going to be in here at 12:15. And now, what happens next? Well, next up, your strategic briefings, and they, of course, will be closely followed by your opening sessions that are in our 5 tracks, lots of details on the screen. You'll make your choices. They only run once, but here's the great news. All of this content will be available online a few days after the event. We'll send you an email with all the information you need to know. That way, you won't miss a thing. All right, we're done in here. Back in here at 12:15. Have a great morning. See you later.